You see, something is going to happen. Something wonderful.
My God, it's full of stars.
Welcome to the NY Patriot Show. I'm very happy to have this man back. It's been probably way too long, in my opinion, actually, since I've had him on and had a discussion with him. I know for myself, I've been very busy doing stuff with the Occult Rejects and specific topics. And my man has been very busy with his own art. And for people who don't know, has even gotten like his artwork approved by Pink Floyd and put on a t-shirt. So I even think that's pretty damn cool in itself. But I do have Teresa, the spiritual gangster herself, co-hosting with me. As usual, when we normally have Robby Marx on, I normally try to get Teresa on anyway. So.
I love talking with Robby. Yeah. I'm very excited to be here. And if people want to know more about Robby, there's an episode all about him on the Spiritual Gangsters podcast. So check it out.
That's true. Mm-hmm. So Robby, we got you on the NY Patriot Show finally again. It's been a while. What's going on in your world, and how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Just been nonstop. Working on a New Year's poster for the Boulder Theater right now. Gasoline lollipops. I've got a bunch, just tons of art cycling through. Been doing tons of research on different stuff. Generally, I kind of break my days and my nights up. During the day, I pretty much focus, on art. And then after the day kind of settles down in the evening, I usually spend 3 to 5 hours just going through different texts and kind of pulling stuff up and kind of just like, doing that cycle and I'm kind of here by myself. I see my wife for about 3 hours a day. Other than that, it's a pretty quiet spot. So I'm pretty hermitized for the winter,
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, that's wild. That's great, though. I'm sure you're getting a lot accomplished.
It's definitely, I feel good being productive,
Yes.
More productive than Netflix.
I understand.
Right? In the evening.
Down in front of the old boob tube now, I can usually go about 40 minutes at most. And I'm like, I have to turn this off and like actually, because it's just, yeah.
I constantly like put something on and then get up and then like I'm sitting in front of my computer now and like taking notes and like that. Yeah.
Yep.
I do that myself. I can only look at the TV for so long and I just get bored. Yeah.
I just find that mind trance state that it puts you in, it just kind of, and growing up, I was a latchkey kid, so I like watch more TV than I should have as a youth. But as I've gotten older, I really just have become more and more disenchanted with it,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah.
I can agree with that.
So, yeah, I was going to say, and then if anybody wants to find where I'm at as far as Twitter, Instagram, my Patreon or my website, I have a link tree now, which if you just go to, yeah, right. Linktree RMarx, RMarx, all one word. And that'll pull up, pretty much everywhere you can get a hold of me. So.
Nice, and we'll include that as well. I love that when a guest has like one link for all their stuff.
Yeah.
That's so much easier for me. So that's definitely, it would be included anyway if it wasn't a link tree, but all your links will be on the bottom as usual. And I guess the topic, you're going to start it off because you're the one presenting it. I actually don't know much about it, but it's basically the Temple of Solomon that you wanted to get into.
Temple of Solomon, yeah.
Awesome.
And this is actually a really huge subject in regard to occult philosophy, esoteric magic, and crosses over into the foundations of religion as a whole. In regard to the progression from Zoroastrianism to Judaism to Christianity to Islam. So this is kind of one of the fundamental aspects that kind of draws all the world philosophies into a singularity.
Yeah, I would say, again, I admit it, I don't know as much as I should, but I do think this is actually a very important topic. I think there's a deep symbolism in a lot of this stuff. And we may even see... a lot of times I think from the past, certain occult ideas or stories from the past, you may sometimes start to see kind of getting replayed in the future sometimes. It's like the future is repeating the past.
And I almost feel in some of those cases that they're actually using those foundational stories and creating an echo of that story to use it as a power reinforcer.
You said it better than me. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Thank you, Robby.
Yeah. So now, as far as the sources for this material, really what we're looking at is, just straight up King James Bible in a lot of cases. We're looking at the Josephus, the texts of Josephus, who was basically one of the first ones to write about a lot of this biblical stuff. And this is in the, Stories of the Jews, and then the Wars of the Jews. He's got a couple different texts where he goes into a lot of this early Solomonic kind of stuff. And then we're also looking at the Legends of the Jews, which is essentially a culmination of a bunch of rabbis, different sayings and different stories that they've kind of all drawn together that they agree upon. And that's Louis Ginsburg. That's like a 7-volume set, of basically the Torah or the Old Testament in long form. So it adds a lot of nuanceful elements and depthens the story in regard to the study of a lot of this material, but that would be non-canonical in regard to Christianity. But this goes back into the Judaistic or the Hebrew writings, so basically, initially with this whole story, it starts with the Hebrew tradition of what they call the world Kaaba, right? And this is a model of what reality is in the heavens that's created before it's manifested on earth. So essentially, the Kaaba of man would be this idea of man being developed in the heavens, in the stars, before he can be manifest and culminate into physical reality. And this goes right along with the Platonic idea, as far as Plato, with the Platonic man, and the idea of universals, how you have the universal dog, the universal man, the base idea of what a thing is, so that it can be manifest in reality. So it's this whole concept of creation coming down or being handed down from Kether in the tree of life down through the different layers of reality before it comes into physical crystallization and manifestation.
I like that. Do you think light plays a lot into that? Possibly.
Yeah, I think light is a huge part of it. I think that there's the essence of thought and the rhythm of thought that basically has the foundational waveform of making what we think something is. And then I think the light plays the part of actually coming in and overlaying, almost skinning that, if you look at it from like a CGI kind of perspective, like you have the base matrix of the makeup, and then the light kind of comes in and skins it. And that light also, I think, has intrinsic information within it, that kind of additionally,
like a DNA almost.
Yeah, it programs reality in waves as it's coming in,
like a printer.
As it's coming down. Yeah. And kind of and also has the memory of what the creation is, and carries that back in a cyclical form, from the bottom to the top, the whole idea of helter skelter, so. And if do you know what a skelter is?
No, actually.
No.
Actually,
I didn't know what it was either until I got chickens, and I actually have a good sized skelter now that'll hold like almost 40 eggs. But basically, it's a slide, and you put the newest eggs in on the top, and you use the ones on the bottom. So you're always using like the eggs that need to be used first. But as you put them on the top, they slide down to the bottom, and then you eat the egg, and then you give the byproduct to the chicken. They make another egg, and it comes back. So you have this cycle.
That's deep.
Yeah, it is deep. It is deep. So,
Wow.
but that's the whole
Even
Charles
egg symbolism
Manson
is interesting.
Beatles kind of helter skelter of, once you get to the top, you go back to the bottom again, and
Wow.
the idea of that manifest reality and how Kether hands down the information and it becomes solidified and rises back up within the traditional esoteric philosophies, you know. So
Makes sense.
well, nonetheless, so in the beginning, when Adam and Eve ate that fruit of knowledge and, basically saw that they were naked and began the formation of death, right? They were ejected from the garden or this supernal realm, that's in the heavens, one of the mansions per se. And basically directly on that spot where they were kicked out of heaven, Adam immediately set to build a hinge. Essentially, Adam was the first one that built like a hinge of stones to basically watch the stars, so that they could tell when the full turning of the ages would happen and they could enter back into heaven. Essentially, that's the idea, right?
What?
Yeah, oh yeah, and this is also. I was just listening to the live show you were doing, NY, and you were talking about the Sephira Yesera, as far as the book that was handed down, and this is the point at which that book, the Sephira Yesera, was handed down by one of the messengers of Yadhe or El, coming from the Elohim, that essentially was the roadmap to be able to get back into the heavenly realm. So it's this idea of being fallen, in out of the garden and then rising again back into, like the Buddhists say, returning to nirvana.
Found that skelter back up again.
You know what that really does remind me a lot though of, or it's like, I guess maybe it's just the way my brain works, and I have kind of like made I guess maybe assumptions or maybe that this is the possibility, but I mean it does sound like a fallen angel trying to get back to heaven. And I have made accusations that I do think that's quite possibly our situation.
Yeah. There's been numerous places that philosophically that you can find that argue that we are indeed those fallen angels, and that we have
We
forgotten.
fell from the stars.
Yeah, literally
into solid formation.
Is it from because even the stars, I think, are part of the crystallization of the three-dimensional world.
Yes.
So when you start getting into
it's light and time and space, all that shit.
Well, and like the seed of life and the flower of life, and how dimensional aspects will blossom and manifest into multiple higher levels, or mansions as they call them in the Bible, that are these different, and as they manifest in a upward manner towards purity and nothingness, they also even crystallize harder and become deeper, darker, and more entwined as they manifest in a downward function. So it's
very much like the tree of life symbol, actually.
Oh yeah, the tree of life upwards and the tree of death inverted upon itself.
Yeah, or even like the Wiccan version where they'll show like all the roots growing out at the bottom and then the whole top coming out.
And they're crawling up the roots to get back to the tree. Yeah. There's it's a lot of deep stuff, but symbolically. So this is where that heavenly couple fell into reality and basically had to begin being humans on the physical plane. And let's see. Now the hinge of stones that was set up, right? This is also where in the center of that hinge of stones, and I found different stories depending on where you read, that it was 5 stones in one story or 6 stones in another story, but nonetheless it's this hinge of stones, and in the center of the stones was the altar. Adam and his children would basically make sacrifices to the Elohim or El or Yahweh. And so this was the same altar that when Abel's sacrifice was refused, or Cain's sacrifice was refused because he was the vegetarian. He brought all vegetables.
God doesn't like plants, apparently.
God does not
I'm
like
kidding.
plant juice. No, he's not a juicer.
Not a vegan.
Yeah. So Abel brought the first of the fledgling flocks, that was like the purest with no blemish, that was the strongest of, basically the best of the flock, and sacrificed it, right? And then Cain brought the vegetable material and was refused. And so then there's the whole Lord Byron story, if you get into that, where Cain actually sacrificed Abel, because he meets all the qualities of, the best of the flock, So, and then God gets upset, saying, what have you done, because the blood was crying out to El, essentially, from the ground. And he was, upset he didn't get the blood. But that altar that this happened at is this exact point where Adam and Eve fell to the earth, that they said, this thing of stones, right? So, and as we progress through this, right, when Adam built this hinge, it was said that a procession of 10,000 angels were appointed to guard this stone circle, and it had the altar in the center. And now then at the time when the flood came, as far as the deluge, right, that washed everything up under, this altar was lost. It was washed up under, and then it wasn't for another 10 generations, essentially, that you came to the point where the world Kaaba was rebuilt, and we have the emergence of Abraham, or Abram, right, of the ram, of the turning of the age of Aries. And he didn't become Abraham until there was a circumcision thing where the boys turned 13. And so it wasn't until he was in his 90s when he had his first kid, and that kid got to 13, that Abram became Abraham.
Damn.
Right? So I want to say Abraham was 103 when but I'd have to look all into that, but there's
around there. Let's say.
So now,
sorry, Robbie, is the altar where Abraham sacrificed Isaac the same spot?
Well, that's what I'm getting into. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Exactly right.
Sorry, I messed up your flow.
No, not at all. So what happened was with Abraham's first son, Ishmael, right? They renewed and rebuilt the altar, and they dedicated it to Jehovah, right? Which is essentially Jove or Jupiter, right? And when you get into the word Jupiter itself, it's Jew and Patar, which is God the Father, right? So Jupiter means God the Father in essence, right? And let's see that, and then I have here the Sefer Yesra, and that it tells us of basically the ancient Kabbalah is founded on the Torah. Let's see, and the Sefer Yesra is translated in Hebrew as that which was received, and now Abraham, this whole Abrahamic religion was evolving out of Zoroastrianism, which is basically Zoroastrianism of the time, right? And Zoroaster is where we get a lot of the early ideas of the beginning. Since there was a beginning, there has to be an end in judgment time, right? And Zoroaster also believed that like every single person had their own guardian angel. So this is where the ideas of the angels even begin to evolve,
That's huge in ceremonial magic, the whole Holy Guardian.
Oh yeah, yeah. And there's guardian angels for the individuals. There's guardian angels for the planets. There's guardian angels for the stars. Like every single star in the heaven has its own guardian angel.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians of the Galaxy. Exactly. Let's see. So, where are we at here? Oh, so now, Abraham, when he was born, right? His father was Terah, who was basically the advisor to Lord Nimrod.
Oh shit! Here we
always
go.
Always with the Nimrod, right? Basically, when the prophets of Nimrod had told him that there was going to be a boy born that would basically overthrow his kingship, much like King Herod. We kind of see this echoing in multiple places, but nonetheless, when that was announced, they took Abraham and hid Abraham away in a cave. And basically another Slavian child was substituted for Abraham, and Nimrod actually with his own hands strangled this youth to death, just to ensure that all the children born that night would never rise against him, right? But Abraham, they had spirited him away into a cave, and he laid hidden away in that cave for 11 years. And essentially, so this is when they think a lot of esoteric philosophies believe he was taught, the secrets of the underworld, coming into and basically knowing how to go against them.
Well, I just think with the number 11 associated in there.
The number of the magician.
Yeah, that even like very Janus-like, which in my opinion, if you were to understand that, you'd have to be a magician to actually, in my opinion, understand what you're looking at.
So let's see. Now Abraham was the first one to make the tithing of 10%. When he came into Jerusalem, and this was to the high priest Melchizedek. Have you heard of Melchizedek before?
I've heard of the Order of Melchizedek, yeah.
Yeah, yes. Jesus was a priest of the Order of Melchizedek.
Yeah, he's from that lineage, right?
Right. So, and when you go back into, and I get into the Order of Melchizedek quite a bit in my Nimrod book, but basically it's almost like the power that is coming down from Kether that energizes everything. And that is kind of the force that is Melchizedek. And then, Philip K. Dick and Pliny the Elder kind of relate this to the idea that these Essenes were taking psychedelic mushrooms, and that Melchizedek was actually the feeling that they would get when they were in that altered state of consciousness.
Come on.
Yeah. So, and there's quite a bit of evidence that there was mushroom use at the time, But then it was at this point when Abram gave that 10% tithing that Melchizedek basically blessed Abraham with the first bread and the first wine as far as sacrament, right? So this is the origin of the Catholic sacrament is at this point with Abraham. And this is also the cup that that Melchizedek uses to bless Abraham is the Holy Grail, is the cup of the Last Supper that ends up being, the one that Jesus uses, for the sacrament and the Last Supper, and is also the cup that's used by Joseph of Arimathea to harvest the blood of Christ coming from the wound, from the spear of Pontius Pilate, right? So this cup is blessed. It was supposedly handed down by an angelic messenger to Melchizedek. and then it was used for this initial first sacrament, and eventually transitions to Jesus, to the harvesting of it. So it has this great esoteric like magic imbibed within it. That, as far as kind of like the Spear Longinus, very much along those lines, and hence we have Indiana Jones and the search for the Holy Grail and all the Grail, and then that even leads up into Eschenbach's Grail quest, and the search for the Philosopher's Stone as well. So
you can't forget about Monty Python too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love that stupid movie.
Love it.
He's going around with the coconuts.
That's wild, though. I did not know that about the origin of the Holy Grail.
Yeah. So, and this goes in Jasher 9:5, it says, Noah and Shem remained with them, Abraham and his Sarah, to learn instruction of the Lord and his ways. So basically, Abram is hanging out with Noah at this point, talking about, the times before the flood, back to, Methuselah and even Adam and, himself. So this is direct lineage back to this foundation point. But nonetheless, it was Abraham now we're going to get into the reason that Abraham went to sacrifice his son, right? So essentially, let's see, when the birth of Isaac happened, right? It was said that all the kings and the highborn, basically merchants, were in attendance, right? And this is from the Legends of the Jews by Louis Ginsburg, which is basically an amalgamation of different rabbis in agreement. So it says that, I'll just read it here. It says, the devil came a knocking. Satan always appears at a feast in which no poor people participate, and keeps aloof from those which poor guests are not invited. He turned up at Abram's banquet in the guise of a beggar, asking for alms at the door. He being there, as he noticed that Abraham had invited no poor man, and he knew that the house was the right place for him to be. Right. So basically, this devil comes a knocking, and he's asking for, alms for the poor, and they turn him away. Right. So this gives the devil the ammunition to begin to mock God or the Elohim, and being like, see, your people, they have no charity, they have no care for the poor people. And so because of this mocking of the devil, basically God wanted to test Abraham, and basically to sacrifice his first son, Isaac. And at the time, this was a very common practice. When you get into the worship of Baal, and you get into Melquart, and you start looking at a lot of these kind of underworld fire gods that are, having children sacrificed to them, in many cases firstborn. There's some authors that say that this was actually a sacrifice of Isaac, and that later it was sanitized, basically, and they changed it. And this would be the point at which we get the emergence of the scapegoat. Because what happens is, and it's funny, because in the texts, let's see, where's it at? Coming together. So it's on Mount Moriah, essentially, where this is going down, right? Which is the current place where we have the Temple Mount, which is where eventually King Solomon will build the Temple of Solomon, right? So, and when they're going up to Mount Moriah, Abraham, he sees a pillar of smoke coming from the top of the mountain. And he says, within the smoke, he sees the appearance of the Lord, telling him that this is the place where the sacrifice should be done. So, and he's talking to Isaac, his son, and there's a matter of interactions where one of the sons doesn't see the pillar of smoke, and Isaac does see the pillar of smoke. And so as they're going, and it's funny because when you're reading the text, Isaac is all excited and he's happy and he's like, wanting to be the sacrifice to Yahweh. And so they get up there and he's tied up essentially, and Abraham's about to cut his throat, and like Abraham's crying and it's mixing with Isaac's tears, and they said it was like creating a flood around the altar. And Michael, the archangel, comes down and he's crying, and he cries on the knife that Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac with, and it somehow gives it the supernatural power that disallows him from cutting his throat. And like, so all the heavens are crying, and finally God steps in, and is like, okay, I can see, like, you're my true warrior now, because you were willing to sacrifice your firstborn, right? And so he's like, look behind you, and there's a ram in a thicket. And so Abraham gets the ram from the thicket and then sacrifices the ram, and that is the blood sacrifice on this altar that Adam had initially built in the same spot that Cain had sacrificed Abel. That now this ram, in the age of the ram at the time, right, is basically sacrificed on this point. And what they say it does is it reactivates the altar and links it back to the world Kaaba, right? So now this altar is active again, right? And that was another thing. There's a big Masonic aspect in regard to the altar itself, right? Because this altar could not be built with any like tempered stone. So it had to be no brick and mortar at all. It had to be all just rocks that were piled. So there's this inherent thing through these stories in regard to almost a rejection of Masonic kind of philosophy. Mm-hmm. And there's also a confrontation between different sorts of Masonic philosophies, which we'll get into a little later, because there was the line of the Noahites, which were the line of Masons coming down from Noah. And then there were the Hiramites, which were the Masons coming from Hiram Abiff, basically in the land of Tyre. And those kind of cross-pollinations and how they fight back and forth through the whole process of the building of the Temple of Solomon.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
The tears on the altar thing reminds me of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe story, where Aslan is, being sacrificed on the altar.
Yep.
They do stab him, but then I think Lucy, it's St. Lucy's Day today. It's actually her feast day. Yep. She cries on the altar, and then Aslan is resurrected. Mm-hmm.
And there was also, if I remember, there was a whole thing about some of the tears of the angels actually getting in Abraham's eyes as well. And that actually weakened his strength. Oh. And as he got older, they said that was the reason he kind of became blind, was being getting those angelic tears in his eyes. Interestingly, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I was trying to find out how long Zeus was raised in a cave, if it was 11 years also, but I can't find it.
Yeah, Zeus was raised in a cave by that goat Amalthea as well. Yeah, there's a whole series. And then when you have, before he goes into Egypt, Joseph, when he's thrown into the pit by his brothers. That's also the kind of a cave story. And all these cave stories, and Zoroaster was also raised in a cave. But all these cave stories really lend to the idea of the seed planted inside the earth for germination. So it's a consistent, even with Ignatius Loyola, when he founded the Jesuit order, he was in a cave meditating when there was some sort of earthquake and a crack formed. And that was the point at which, the thought was inspired for him to form the Jesuit order. So again and again and again, this cave is a foundational model for the germination of these different philosophies.
I think that even like the god Ptah is even almost kind of like in that sense, like of springs, like from being underneath the ground, and then springing up. You see some depictions where it will look like you could see maybe that's like a cave that he's supposed to be in.
Right.
And you might have mentioned it yourself, and sorry if I'm just repeating something. I kind of like went down a rabbit hole in my own head with some of the stuff you were saying before about the tears in the eye. I mean, even Islam. I mean, this guy was in a cave, and wasn't he also in a cave? And Gabrielle came and was
so the cave that he was in is exactly in the same place where the Temple Mount is. So all of these philosophies have these origins, dreams, kind of linked in with this linking of this altar back to the heavenly Kaaba, to the earthly Kaaba. So this essentially, the idea is that this temple is a representation of the temple of God in heaven, as we move through, So, and if it's interesting, because if we go back and look at the beginning of the Jewish calendar, which is 3760 BC, this is the point at which this event was supposed to happen, where this whole phenomena started, right? And then it was 2000 BC, we have the birth of Abram. 1300 BC, we have the Exodus. And then 1200 is Josiah's conquest of Canaan. 1150 BC is the beginning of Judges. And then 1025, Saul anointed by Samuel as the first king of Israel. And this would be the point at which this temple is, began to be thought about. And King David, he was really the one that wanted to build this temple to God. Let's see. But before the temple, we had the tabernacle, which was the base model and foundation, and where all of the religious process and the sacrifices basically were developed out of through Moses, Moses and the tabernacle. And basically it was a traveling tent of Israelites. And if you translate Israelite, it means the warriors of God. So initially when they were in Egypt, they were the Ibiru, which were, it's those without footing. Almost like you have the idea of the wandering Jew.
Yeah.
And basically, they end up in Egypt, and then through the course of the Exodus, come down into Canaan, taking Canaan, and then you have tie-ins with the Phoenicians in regard to the royal color purple, in regard to the sea routes, and in regard to the spread of the mystery schools as well. But
what I want to ask you real quick, I guess because you're an artist and I could ask your opinion. I do think you mentioned like a tent or something before, correct? Yeah. From my experience, I have seen that in initiations. Whatever it is, what it is. I have seen a tent before. I've noticed sometimes clown imagery or things with other secret societies, they may use like clown tents or tents as symbolism, carnivals, stuff like that. Then if you even want to start getting into like the back of like your eyeball and the way the optic nerve looks and like the way it goes up and, all this other weird looking shit up there. Even like the Empress Tarot card, I think you almost start seeing almost the same type of symbology. Do you think there might actually be something behind like a tent? Like, even put it this way, Motley Crue shows a tent out in the desert on Dr. Feelgood, but then Dr. Dre and Tupac are showing a desert with a tent out on it as well. Like, you got two totally different styles, but they're showing the same imagery.
Right. And when you get into the early circus, as far as the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circuses, if you go back and look at the Ringling Brothers ads from around the time of the World's Fair, when the circuses were really kind of kicking off, the first shows that they were putting on were about Solomon and Queen Sheba coming together. And the whole and the circus tent itself, also echoing back to this idea of this tabernacle of not the tabernacle, the tabernacle, as far as the traveling tabernacle tent that Moses had, and the way that was constructed was, as you moved into the center of it, it became holier and holier until you reached the center where the Holy of Holies was, that only the high priest could go in. And as you, almost like Demeter, when she goes into Hades and she has to remove all of her earthly garments as she progresses down. It's very, very similar in the idea that as you move closer to the center, you have to get rid of your worldly ideas and your worldly goods. And then, when you get to a certain point, you would rub the sacred oil on your body, which I have a description of here somewhere. But it's basically cinnamon and cannabosum, which is cannabis oil, along with myrrh oil, which is and the myrrh and the cinnamon actually activate the cannabinoids, right? And back in Egyptian times, they had this drink called the kykeon, which had frankincense. Frankincense also has cannabinoids in it, and myrrh, and then the cinnamon, or the true Ceylon, not the cheap knockoff cinnamon, but basically bringing those together. This drink, the kykeon, was basically like 7 to 10 times as strong as just taking cannabis oil, because these certain substances would activate the cannabinoids. And so the high priest would actually rub this holy oil on to him, right? And we also have like,
that's interesting, just thinking about certain like incense recipes I've thought of.
Oh yeah, man. Well, and that was the thing when we get into the Queen of Sheba. She basically came down and gave Solomon all these high questions and riddles. But that was the thing she was bringing. She was bringing these spices from Ethiopia, essentially, and it was I think it's in the Bible. At one point in the King James, where they say that at no other time in history had this amount of spices and incense been brought into the Holy Land.
There was, I know at some point, I don't think it's the same chick, but I remember like watching stuff on Egypt, and I think at one point when they were the most richest, it was actually like some woman running the shit.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole thing that they were doing is that they said that she was like really a genius with the whole importing and exporting.
Right.
And their huge thing was like incenses, and they specifically, it was like myrrh.
Myrrh.
Like they were huge into spices and incense and importing it and exporting it. It was something had to be up with that. I mean, did everybody just want to smell the shit and feel it was cool?
And that's when you start to get into a lot of the Solomonic magic, what you're really dealing with is sympathetic magic. So it's the idea that these these herbs and these incenses and these spices, when you burn them, too. Yeah, in combination in certain ways, in certain environments, they were used for magical purposes and conjuring and yeah.
I have often said that I do think, like, sometimes I think people get a little carried away with, like, I guess, like, getting into the incense and the herbs with magic. But I do think what you're saying right there is actually what people should be focusing on more. I do actually think that sometimes these herbs might actually be kind of giving off the type of atmosphere you're trying to even work with.
Right. The vibration you're
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Even in a Catholic mass, they burn incense if it's a high mass.
Yes. And that's frankincense and myrrh. And so so you got to realize in the church when they're burning the frankincense and he's going up and down the aisles, that's a low level cannabinoid. So
the wise men knew what they were doing.
Yeah, they're literally putting a incense in the air that I would say has the potential on a low level to get them slightly stoned.
I even think there's silly to go back to this and reference it, but even in Lucifer Rising, Teresa, probably, I don't think you've probably seen that. I don't know if you've seen that, Robby Marx, but
I tried to read the book like 4 times and I got like a third of the way in and put it away.
There was like a point where it shows like the guy, and I have looked into it, and they did make things like this. I just forgot the instances that it was used in, but you would almost have like something much larger that would have like incense in it, and you'd be shaking it like this.
Yeah.
And it creates like a crazy cloud, and they were showing a guy in Lucifer Rising doing that. And if you're really looking at it, I'm like, yo, you're smoking the fuck out of this room. Yep. And I was just like, that's like overboard. And then like now, after looking back at it years after different experiences, I'm like, one, I could see possibly like if there is something to do with changing the frequency, maybe that's why you're using that much. And even to maybe this is a little bit out there, but again, where I do say I think in real magic there has to be some sort of like an NDE. I do think if you're wearing a hooded mask now with no mouthpiece and you're flooding the fuck out of the area that you're in with smoke, you're getting very little oxygen.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and so as within this tabernacle, right, as you would go into the pure spaces, there's also some recent documentation that within the temples, they were actually burning the cannabisum on the altar, right? And you have within the Hebrew philosophy, the pillar of fire at night and the pillar of smoke in the day. And this pillar of smoke is where they said, the Lord would manifest within the pillar. So if you're rubbing all this oil all over your body, and then you're going into basically this, almost like sewn up holy of holies, the room, and you're burning high levels of cannabisum, and you're hotboxing it, and you have the oil, and so you're going to stand there and you're going to commune with God. That's what you're there for.
You know what this is bringing me back to, again, something that looks like a tent, like the way the Native Americans had their own version of it. Instead of smoking themselves out, they went into a sweat lodge. And if you stayed in there long enough, I don't know what changes, but like people will have these like wild, like practically almost like I'm afraid I'm gonna fucking die, but I'm gonna stay. And then you have this spiritual fucking experience.
Yeah, a vision
similar
quest.
Thing,
yeah. And it's like maybe it's all working on different ways of like.
I mean, I just even from mass, I can remember as a kid, like every time they bust out the incense, I get tired.
Yeah,
like I would almost be falling asleep in church. Now as an adult, it doesn't bother me very much, but I remember being like,
but on a subtle level, they're changing the way your mind is functioning and putting you into an altered state of consciousness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wild.
So let's see, and I've been researching this whole topic it's kind of been in the background for like dozens of years, and I've kind of been compiling the stuff just because I think it's a relevant topic.
Oh yeah.
But like I have all the God gave Moses instructions to sacrifice a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the evening with choice flour and beaten oil, wine as a drink offering, and the blood, the fat, the kidney, the liver belonged to the Lord. There was no blood sacrifice allowed outside of the temple. Let's see. Oh, and then Leviticus 17:7, it says, and they shall no more offer their sacrifices unto devils after whom they have gone whoring. So, and it was anyone, that was the other thing, anyone sacrificing children unto Baal at this point, they were stoned to death by the Hebrews, so, wow. and the whole idea of within, a lot of times when you get into the modern conspiratorial stuff, going back into the French Revolution, going back into the different nations of Europe, and I think to a great extent the Hebrew people, the true practitioners of Judaism, were scapegoated in regard to the idea of blood libel, and I think that they've been used consistently through history as a scapegoat for various purposes. And I think that current, and I hate to get into politics now, but Zionism is not the Hebrew religion. They're two completely different things, but let's see. And this was also when this tabernacle was going around. This was the same time that the idea of the Jubilee was created. And the Jubilee, it was the idea that every so many years, it's like 50 years, or there's a whole 7-year cycle of Jubilees. At 7 to 7, it's 49. I think it's every 49 years, like all the slaves are freed, and the money is set back to zero, so nobody has any debt anymore. So they kind of already realized that, the inherent problems of the machinations of mammon or money at this point,
Interesting.
Yeah. And this is also when we have the breastplate of judgment, which was a type of ephod, which was used for divination purposes. And so now, are you familiar with this breastplate?
Not really.
No, so within the tabernacle and later on, even in Solomon's temple, they would wear this breastplate of judgment. The breastplate of judgment. And essentially what it was it had 2 stones on the shoulder, right, that were made of onyx, like shoulder pads. And in each one of those stones was engraved 6 of each of the tribes of Israel, right? Because those the 12 tribes of Israel, which essentially I get into quite a bit in my Nimrod book, in regard to the foundation of the 12 tribes, coming from Jacob and Esau at that point. And so you have these onyx stones, and when you get into researching onyx itself, as far as within magical processes, right, it has to do with the cypress, hellebore, the yew tree, nightshade, the oak, and the ivy. It's directly related with Set, or the crocodile of Egypt. It has to do with making pentacles, and is related to the sickle, avarice, and envy. And on the Empress scale of color, it is black with a flashing yellow. So essentially, I think what these were the 2 pillars of foundation, or the 2 side trees, pillars on the tree of life, essentially, Yakin and Boaz. And I think that the reason it's black onyx is because it has to do with crystallizing in the fundamental aspects of what reality is. You know what I mean? And so then from there would be gold chains that would come down, and there was a breastplate that they would wear that had 3 squares across and 4 squares going down, right? And so you got a total of it's a type of a magic square. And it's 3x4, so you have 12 total, which relates to the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And each one of these, I'm going to go from left to right, top to bottom. But you had emerald, which was for the tribe of Levi, which were the priest class. You had topaz, which were for Simeon. Sardis, which was for the tribe of Reuben. Jasper, Zebulon. Sapphire was for the tribe of Issachar. Carbuncle was for the tribe of Judah. Amethyst was for the tribe of Gad. Agate was for the tribe of Naphtali. Ligure was for the tribe of Dan. Beryl was for the tribe of Benjamin. Onyx was for the tribe of Joseph. And chrysolite was for the tribe of Asher. And so essentially, this breastplate was used as what they called an ephod. And I don't know if you saw the show I just did on Oracular Talking Heads, by chance. No. So basically, with these early talking heads, these early teraphim, or these household gods, they would have one part that was earthly matter combined with metal. And that could be anything from a piece of wood to a head, like a physical head. And then on top of that, they would have what they called the ephod, which would either be a priestly garment robe, or sometimes it would be an arrow that would be wrapped in gold. And sometimes they would have a bunch of arrows in a case and shake them. But this whole idea of this ephod was for the purposes of divination, right? So this breastplate was for the purpose of speaking with the Elohim in the heavens.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Or the idea of like crystal, like using crystals to communicate and,
right,
draw energy from and stuff. It's interesting.
Right. And what each one of those energetic vibrations of those crystals and how they work. When you start getting into crystals, some of them charge negatively, some of them charge positively, some of them charge both negatively and positively. They, and then within the different structures of the crystals themselves, you also have different geometric structures, from cubic to pyramidal to octahedron to the 7 essential platonic forms of matter that Plato talks about, would be all the different base crystalline forms. So now the origin of this breastplate is probably the most interesting part. When you get into the old rabbi tales of Lucifer walking in the heavens with the Elohim.
Oh, yeah, and it's full of jewels, right?
Yeah, and Lucifer, he wore that breastplate in the heavens when he walked with God in Eden, right? And when Lucifer's fallen, the Hebrews almost take this breastplate and invert it. So because it's fallen from the heavenly realm, it's in the earthly realm. If you want to talk to the heavenly realm, it's inverted for the purpose of communication.
Oh.
So, and this was, something that was used all through the tabernacle into the Temple of Solomon. And then when they went into the Babylonian exile, it disappeared. But when Zerubbabel rebuilt the second temple, there was a second breastplate that was reconstructed and used in the second temple. I didn't see anything in the third temple about it. So, but the third temple is yet to come. So we've only had, they're working to rebuild the temple now. So,
maybe they'll have the glove of Thanos.
Yeah, that's a whole interesting thing.
Yeah, which has got stones on it too, right?
That's it. That's what I said.
Well, the hand of God.
Yeah, and that goes back to some. It's like a French artifact of some high religious woman figure, if I remember right.
Oh, shit.
That glove of Thanos is actually based on a real artifact. So
that's cool.
I had Nick's on recently, and It was like, I guess, like paganism and Catholicism. And she was like showing like I guess like a hand gesture, but then it also like matched like Sabazius's hand of God or something like that.
The sacred
and
hand
it
of the
has like it has like the fucking pine cone
on
the thumb.
All the different symbols.
Yeah.
No way.
And I was like, yo, there's the fucking microphone from Twin Peaks season 3 with the fucking pine cone.
Yeah.
But it was just like really weird, and like there's a guy associated with the OTO named Sabazius.
Yep.
So it's like, but that hand thing was really interesting.
Oh yeah, and that goes. That's an ancient hand symbol, and you see even in a lot of representations of Jesus, he'll be throwing up the sacred hand of the mysteries. You know, that's a whole show in itself, man.
Totally. Oh jeez.
So let's see now. Josephus said, in the second temple, when the breastplate was refabricated, Josephus says, when worn, it shot forth brilliant rays of fire that manifested the immediate presence of Jehovah. And you got to figure they have within this tabernacle, they have also the Ark of the Covenant, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see again with Indiana Jones and in various other places and Hollywood representation. But this was the Ark that basically it was made from acacia wood, which in this region was the highest ratio of DMT or dimethyltryptamine. Is the same acacia bush that was the burning bush for Moses when he had his communications there, and then it was wrapped in gold, and the dust from these 10 commandments was basically in this Ark of the Covenant. That was it had 4 rings on each corner, 1 ring on each corner, 4 rings, and they would hold it. I think it was ash poles that were coated in gold, and they would carry that around. And that's interesting because there's symptoms of like radiation sickness associated with that. There's all these different symptoms of some sort of plague or rotting sickness or wasting that are associated with being around it. And the people that carried it, they actually had to wear like gold chains that draped on the ground, and they would carry it by the poles so they wouldn't directly touch it, and that Ark of the Covenant had 2 cherubim angels upon it. I have a description of it here somewhere, but so essentially, those cherubim angels, which the cherubim was set up over Eden with a sword of light or sword of fire, basically to keep humans from entering back into Eden, right? And so these same cherubim, these are generally guardian angels, warrior angels that are, and it was the 10,000 angels that were appointed to guard the Kaaba on earth, and they were echoed in the heavens, 10,000 angels in heaven. But all this was, and they said that under those wings of the cherubim on what they call the mercy seat is where the Lord would manifest when they were, basically having communication sessions, so it's just interesting how getting into divination and all these ideas of prophecy and talking to energies outside of our realm kind of come into play within this whole story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So the breastplate eventually was carried to Byzantine by Justinian and was said to be put in the treasury of Saint Sophia. And then there's also stories that it left Rome and went to Carthage, which is a Phoenician city, and by Gensring. And after the sacking of Rome, this would be in 70 CE or AD, and supposedly that ship sunk. And so some say it went into the treasury of Sophia and the Byzantine and disappeared, and some say it was on a ship to Carthage, and that sunk. And there's a huge link in between the Phoenicians and the Israelites in regard to, I believe that they're essentially the same group of people, that it's separated at one point. And when the Exodus happened, the Israelites coming back into Cana in Phoenicia was a merger of that same people group after being separated for 400 years, you know? Oh, here we go. I have the holy oil. And this was given to Moses for purification, and to be used only in sacred settings. And it was myrrh, cassia, aromatic cane, and they would use over 6 pounds of cannabosum in this recipe, right? And then it had olive oil, and anyone who used it outside of the temple setting or outside of the tent setting was cast out from the community. This was only to be used within the setting of the tabernacle.
That's crazy. Those reminds me of Dune.
I know, right?
Right, with the spices and stuff, so. And then the whole Messiah figure. I'm just
again,
like, this is
tents in the desert.
Yes.
Again.
Yes, very much so.
Oh my
very
God,
so.
right?
You know,
I'm like, this is a story I've heard before, but I've forgotten. It's like deep in the subconscious.
Oh yeah,
that's
even. This is the deepest origins of Zoroastrianism manifesting into Judaism, which is the foundation for Christianity and Islam.
Yeah, well, right now, I've been trying to do it for since 2020, go through a podcast called Bible in a Year.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm still in the Old Testament, 3 years later, because I don't listen every day like I should. Yeah. But I'm in the part where exactly it's the desert wanderings chunk of the Old Testament, and talking about the tent of meeting and all these symbols and like prophecies that basically prepares the way for Christ to then become the ultimate sacrifice in the Eucharist, you know. So it's all like just foreshadowing, and that's exactly what he was for.
The coming of the Kwisatz Shadrach.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. So layered.
It is.
Yeah.
So then we have, 1005 BC, King David takes rule. In 1000 BC, David's conquest of Jerusalem establishes the capital there. And David begins the temple, preparing the way for Solomon. Now, David, in his initial preparedness for Solomon, he appoints 4,000 hewers of stone with over 150,000 strangers from other lands to carry the stones.
Strangers.
It sounds like slaves to me.
It's like a nice way of saying it.
Yeah. And he prepares large quantities of iron and brass, and sets aside 10,000 talents of gold and 10,000 talents of silver. And he tells Solomon to build the temple to God, which David had wished to, but because of all the blood that was on David's hands, God wouldn't let him build a temple to him because he was so polluted from ravaging the surrounding lands. And I think that also has a huge amount to do with what's going on in the modern vernacular in regard to wanting to rebuild this temple again. It has to be built from a pure standpoint without the blood on the hands of the warrior kings, you know? So it kind of contradicts the ideas if that's what they're really pushing for. You know what I mean? Let's see. So, and now this was the point when, let's see. Oh, so they anoint finally, David sends the high priest of Zadok to anoint Solomon with the sacred oil to transfer the kingship. And Solomon rides in King David's mule. And that's the other, I think it's funny because like people look at mules as like asses or like a funny kind of thing, or like, you know, like a jackass, or, but back during this time, mules were the pinnacle of a work animal. They could survive anything. They could go anywhere. Even in the building of the early West of the United States, Kit Carson, when he was traveling around everywhere, the only thing he rode was a mule because they could go through anything. Mules have this intrinsic nature as far as the animal itself of being able to come out on top or oversee any land without a problem. So, you know, within the philosophical idea of what the animal is, you know, there was a reason that kings rode mules back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, and the mule ended up carrying Mary on her way to Bethlehem, and then carried Jesus on Palm Sunday.
Right. And I think the Zadok priests or the wise men, the Magi that came in, they were camels maybe?
Yeah, they supposedly came on camels, but they were crossing the desert, so you need that water retention.
Yeah, true. And this was at the point, Solomon rode King David's own mule down to Gihon, and proclaimed, "Let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him there king over Israel." And this was the point also because the Zadoks, they were the high priests of Melchizedek, right? And they had been supplanted at a certain point. So this is also the same point which we see the priests of Melchizedek coming back in through the Zadok priests to rule over the temple setting, right? And then, you know, Solomon basically, once he gets in, he prays for wisdom, right? And he tries to make peace with all his neighbors. And he marries Nikaule, who's the daughter of the pharaoh Sayamun. But there was a point where Solomon was riding around trying to get different nations to help him build this temple. And he wrote to Egypt at one point, and I've only seen it in a couple places, but it's there, where essentially the Egyptians sent some workers to help him, and all of the workers were trying to kill Solomon and assassinate him. And so Solomon ended up just sending them all back. But that's eventually what happens is Solomon gets in touch with the king of Tyre, which is Hiram, right? And now this is the point inherently which, if you speak to speculative Masons, they will tell you that, you know, this is not the same Hiram as in Masonic philosophy. But if you read the Masonic Encyclopedia and you read all the various Masonic texts, they all relate Hiram Abiff back to the architect for the Temple of Solomon. So this king of Tyre, let me see if I can find this part here. Let's see, Josephus, he documents the letters between Solomon and Hiram. And Hiram sent 80,000 stonecutters or masons, both from, this is an interesting part. There was 80,000 stone masons brought together to essentially build the Temple of Solomon, right? And so part of these masons were what they call the Noahites, right? And these were Masons that had come down from the line of Noah, that were the builders of the structures for the miscellaneous Zadoks, into some of the Zoroastrians, into the Ibiru, into the Israelites, right? And then you have a whole different section of Masons coming out of the king of Tyre, or Hiram Abiff, right? And these were the Hiramites. So at this point, when we're building Solomon's temple, you're essentially getting the Noetic Masons and you're getting the Hiramite Masons coming together to build the Temple of Solomon, right? So it's like a force multiplier almost, right? And let me I got some other notes over here. Let me find this one spot here. So Mackey from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry.
Nice. I've actually been using some of his stuff a lot, some of the occult rejects, just as like things to refer to, because it's pretty old. So you know, and it's just interesting. Like, I think I've even seen, if you go through there, you might be surprised of like secret societies that are mentioned in that book that you're like, oh, I didn't think it existed then.
And I think that this right here, what we have is there's almost a hidden line of Masons, these Noetikites going back to Noah, that are not talked about within Masonic philosophy. And a lot of Masons, I don't even think they know about this at all. But okay, so Mackey from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the version I have it right here. I'll pull it out so you can see it. This is the book, and it's from 1886, and it's just, I mean,
it's gigantic,
thick with, you know, it's got symbols, it's got, you know, we were just talking about the hand sign. Right there.
Oh yeah.
Ah, that's crazy.
So, you know, I love looking through this book. I need to get it rebound. I was even thinking of rebinding it myself, but that's time.
I think even when I covered Albertus Magnus with him and his android, or androidus, I think that word is even in there in that book and refers back to Albertus Magnus.
Albertus Magnus, yeah. So Mackey, he says these Hiramites, in the degree of Patriarch Noahites, the legend is that the Masons of that degree are descended from Noah through Peleg, right? And this character Peleg is really interesting to me, because Peleg was the architect for the Tower of Babel.
Oh.
And he worked under Nimrod in constructing the Tower of Babel, right? So let's see. And these Noahites, who Peleg is descended from, so these Noahites were the ones that were behind the construction of the Tower of Babel, as far as the Masons and the architect, right? And they distinguished themselves, therefore, as Noahites, and they call the Masons of the other degrees Hiramites, as being descended from Hiram Abiff. And the word Peleg itself means division, right? And he was one of the two sons of Eber, the ancestors of both the Ishmaelites and the Israelites. So this is at the point where we have the servants of Sarah sleeping with Abraham to produce the other lines that weren't recognized as the holy bloodline, right? And so you have the Noahites coming down as the pure form of Masonry, where I believe that Peleg almost has something to do with the Ishmaelite Masons. So you have the Israelite Masons and the Ishmaelite Masons, right? And let's see. And the ancestors of the Kahataran Arabs, who were these Ishmaelite Masons, right? They came to be known as the Samaritans.
Oh, and then that's why the Samaritans and the Hebrews, or I don't know, Israelites hated each other.
I think so.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right. So let's see. And Peleg, right, is also associated with a Pelasgo, which is to the Greeks the Pelagians. So I think that these Masons coming down eventually moved into Greek, and they actually dedicated a temple again to Jehovah or to Jupiter. So, they're both worshiping the same gods. And there's cases back and forth where after the temple is completed and these Samaritans or these Hiram Abiff, these Hiramites, are basically like, when they're rebuilding the second temple, they're like, well, we're Jews too. We believe in all the same stuff. We believe in, and the Israelites are like, no. You go do your own thing. Like, we got this here. So there's been this constant, and this all comes down to essentially Masonic philosophy and these different divisions of these Masons through these ages working to build temples in different styles and structures.
Oh, I think, not to sound silly, but like you're talking about Ishmael, and like if you think about like the whole term male, and even like Gmail, and how it looks like a Masonic apron. I mean, yeah,
but it's in red.
But like just even thinking like of the advanced form of it. I mean, Gmails, all you're doing is just like tossing light through cables,
right?
Of information,
right?
I don't know. It's just and that even goes back to like there was Jesuit priests that thought that there was ways of like sending spirits through sound and shit. So,
oh yeah.
It's like, what the fuck?
Well, and I think also when you start looking at the Masons in regard to Hiram Abiff and the Blue Lodge, and even getting into the 33 degree, machinations of Albert Pike in regard to selling degrees, then you have the highest order of the Masons, which is the Shriners. And the Shriners, all of a sudden, it flips from Hiram Abiff to these Islamic Masons.
I always thought that was very...
And I think this is the reason why.
Very weird.
Because of these Samaritan lines of Arabic Masonry that kind of have been divided, that were brought together to build the first Solomon's Temple, but were separated and have been in conflict since.
I've been saying it over and over again on the Occult Rejects with stuff that will be coming out. I think there is like some sort of like knowledge of Islamic magic and occultism that's like either been lost or been ignored.
Seems very old.
Yeah, and I think it's more of like kind of like a very deeply encoded in a lot of, I think, in Thelemic magic, I think in Masonry. There's a cult that me and Teresa and JJ Vance were covering, the Nubian cult, that had Dwight York Malak, whatever his name, Dwight Z. I can't remember.
Dwight York, I think is
some shit
regular
like,
name.
Yeah, he might have called himself Z Malachi later on. I don't know. He had all these different names, but like his cult had like these costumes, and he legit just basically took the Shriner's hat and threw a hexagram in like the middle of like the sword and some other shit. Yeah. It was like, it's like you literally are seeing the same symbolism in that hat that we're actually seeing now with war.
Oh, yeah.
And a red hat.
Yeah. Well, and that fez, do you know the origin of the fez?
Dipping the hat into the blood of Christians.
Right. But that was because of the Crusades, where these Teutonic Knights were going to reclaim Jerusalem for the purpose of claiming the Temple Mount, where Solomon's Temple was. This all comes down to Solomon's Temple, man.
This is crazy.
Well, shit.
Yeah. That's why it's such a big kind of topic, you know?
Yeah, no, that's why, because there's so many times where it's like I would come across things that's like somehow this goes back to Solomon's Temple, and I don't really know much about it.
Right. You
know, but I do think it is a very deeply encoded story or timeline or something.
Oh, yeah. And I think, what is it, Joseph P. Farrell? He wrote, I think it's that book called The Temple at the Center of Time. And it kind of deals with this whole topic as well.
I've seen some of his, I think I might have actually read some of his old stuff.
Yeah. I like his stuff. He's fun. He's a fun read.
Yeah, no, it's an easy read, and I think it's a good basic understanding.
Yeah. So now Hiram, king of Tyre, right? Tyre was a Phoenician city.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I have it here. But the Phoenicians, I mean, back to the Phoenicians, as far as the sea people, they were the ones that were making the purple dyes of royalty from the little sea creature. And so Hiram...
You think that was a big moneymaker?
Yeah, well, you couldn't get that color anywhere else, and they directly associated it with royalty. So it was almost a way to come in on the back end, as a niche market to sell just to the royalty.
That was
smart.
Who did that? Jack the Ripper and his grapes. Like he had his grapes and his wine, so these chicks automatically thought, like, going by the story we're given in the movies, the chicks would automatically think like, oh, this guy's bougie. Grapes aren't, that's not, cheap back then.
Oh, no, grapes were pretty pricey, So now Hiram, if you go back and research Hiram, in his setting, he presented himself as a descendant of Melquart. And Melquart was the major deity of the Phoenician and Punic pantheons. And he was the tutelary god of the city of Tyre. Let's see. Ezekiel says that Jehovah speaks to Hiram. He says that thou hast said, I am God. I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. So now in Tyre, the trinity that they had for the city itself, right, was Melquart, who is the son of Poseidon. And then you have Baal, which is the son of Dagon, one of the patron deities of the mariners or the sea people, the Phoenicians. And then you have the goddess Astarte, which was the lady of the sea. And when you get into Astarte, basically it has a lot to do with sex and war, and how these two intrinsic energies kind of come together. And it also has, links in with the idea of the morning star and the evening star, as far as the energies within that. And Astarte was the first goddess that was a transgender goddess. And if you read some of her stuff, when she would go to the bar room, she would look one way and she would be a male speaking to females, and she would look the other way and she would be a female speaking to males. And that's kind of where we get this costume that is the division of the male and the female, kind of evolving from Astarte.
There are even some Janus depictions where we'll
Janus as well.
We'll show a female. And the name of, it might be Mussolini or something like that. I had Nix on my show a while ago, and she was covering a kind of like a, she thought was maybe possibly where Starbucks logo came from. And it was a very aquatic figure, but
it's the Skyla.
And in some of these depictions, whenever they would show this same goddess, there was always like a guy, like a key in the depiction too, opening like a door. She was there, and it was just like really weird how like I do think you're still seeing the whole kind of like male and female,
right,
sense.
Well, and that goes back to all the ancient hermaphroditic kind of representations of the true divine form of humanity, and how we there was the splitting of the sexes at the time of Zeus, and kind of intrinsically now we've been separated from ourselves, You know?
I've actually even wondered if it goes as far back as to like, you know, how I do equate some occult ideas and stuff to, you know, the physical self. I question if that goes back to like the water around your brain. You know, it's symbolizing stuff like that. You
know. Let's see. So now Hiram was called Chia Ram, which in Hebrew means noble born. And in the Masonic literature, when the head mason or the high mason uses the gavel, right? The gavel itself is called the Hiram.
Oh.
And basically the reason for that is because it controls, it directs. And when Hiram Abiff was killed in the legends, he was struck 3 times with the mallet, you know, from different initiates. So the mallet is a representation of Hiram Abiff himself, right?
Well, doesn't that even go back to, I think I covered it myself with the, when I covered From Hell. But doesn't that go back to even like in that movie when they blamed the Jews, they spelt it differently because like there was like the Jubellum or whatever. There was like the 3 people kind of have had the word Jew but spelled different in their name that did that. Right?
That's going back to the 3 original, almost you would see them as merchants. They were the creators and propagators. You know, Tubal Cain brought about the sword, but then you have Jubal, Jubal, and Jubellum, which were essentially propagating Zilla had invented drums and the first musical instruments, and it was these 3 Jews, as the Masons call them, that were going around propagating musical instruments, weapons, and basically the first merchants that were the ones going around and selling things and beginning the trading routes between cultures. So that's what that really goes back to.
Yeah, like Jubal was one of the first like musicians on record or something.
Right.
And you get the word Jubilee.
Right.
From that.
Yeah. Now Hiram was also a widow's son. And his mother was a daughter of the tribe of Naphtali, which were of the Danites, of the Israelites. So Hiram was essentially also, but the tribe of Dan seems to have been an anathema to the rest of the tribes and kind of like were hated by the rest of the tribes. And the Danites were always like, you know, looked down upon and kind of separated out from the rest, as well as the Benjamites, you know.
All about the Benjamins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about Hiram that maybe you want to cover, and we'll try to wrap it up here after that? Before we, or if there's like something else you need to include before we
Hiram is basically the topic that I'm about to go full on into.
All right, so then maybe if you want to wait, we'll do that in episode 2 if you want.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
Yeah, because we're already at an hour and a half now, so
yeah, okay.
That's a good primer, I guess.
Yeah, teaser for part 2.
Yeah, so this leads us up to where the Temple of Solomon is important, and it also leads us into this character of Hiram Abiff, which we can get more into, and then we'll talk about the building of the temple, and we'll also get into Solomonic magic.
Awesome. Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Thank you so very much, Robbie. That was a lot. That was a lot.
It's like I always am mesmerized when Robbie speaks. It's like story time where you're like in kindergarten and you pull up and you sit cross-legged and you're just like, mm-hmm.
This is why I was like, I don't want to go live because I want to pay attention to what he's actually saying.
I love it.
Of the 60 pages I've got here to the fall of the first temple, we're on page 19.
Oh, all right. Not bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like a third. That's good.
I like that number, 19.
Nice.
All right. Robby, let everybody know where they can find your stuff again, please. And like I know, plug your MettaMindcast and all that stuff.
Yeah, I've got the MettaMindcast, which you can pretty much find on any pod server. It's all one word, MettaMindcast. And that's basically the shows I do with other people I throw up there. And then I have my website, I have my Etsy, I have my Instagram. All that you can find at my Linktree, which is RMarx at Linktree, and that'll take you to all my stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Teresa, let everybody else know about your amazing podcast as well.
Yeah, sure. So people can check out the Spiritual Gangsters if they have not already. But yeah, you can find that on all the major podcast platforms. And always Tuesdays, we go live with a special edition of it called Clown World Weekly, which is a lot of fun.
Yes.
Where we just make fun of the news and give our
really fun, cool chat as well. Like everybody.
Yeah,
really
the live chat is great.
Yeah, it's funny stuff.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate you both spending your time today and coming on. And that is the end of another NY Patriot episode. And, whatever this takes, maybe 2 or 3 episodes, but we'll get it done. Thank you very much, Robby. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.